nobody knew who her father was. That was the story. Every biography, every documentary, every profile of the most photographed woman of the 20th century quietly left the same blank space where a man should have been. Somewhere in a preservation case at the University Archives in Connecticut sits a lock of platinum hair. It was collected on the 4th of August, 1962, the morning of Marilyn Monroe's death, by the man who embalmed her body. For 60 years, it held a secret she had spent her entire life trying to confirm. This is not a story about scandal. There are living members of the Gifford family, real people carrying real names, and this account treats them with the care they deserve. They did not choose this history. They inherited it. What the DNA extracted from that single strand revealed was not simply a name. It was the confirmation of something Marilyn Monroe already suspected, something a man living on a California farm refused to acknowledge until the day she stopped asking. Keep the name Charles Stanley Gifford in your mind. It will matter more than it first appears. Stay with this. What the record shows is worth the time. The official account of Marilyn Monroe's origins is a clean, sad story with a clean, sad ending. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, worked as a film negative cutter at Consolidated Film Industries in Los Angeles. She had already survived 2 failed marriages, the second, a brief union to a Norwegian-born man named Martin Edward Mortensen, had collapsed months before Norma Jean was conceived in the summer of 1925. Gladys listed Mortensen's name on the birth certificate anyway. It was a practical act in a decade when the word illegitimate carried legal and social consequence. The father, officially, was unknown. But Gladys told her daughter something once. She produced a gold-framed photograph, kept in a place of deliberate presentation, and said, "This is your father." The man in the photograph was Charles Stanley Gifford, her supervisor at the studio. The first crack in the accepted silence appeared in 1996. In a documentary from that year, Marilyn's first husband, police officer James Doherty, described watching his young wife dial a number she had tracked down through her mother's former colleagues. She called the man in the photograph. He answered. His response, as Doherty recalled it, "No, I don't know who you are. See my attorney." Doherty said she was, in his own words, real sad afterward. She drove to Gifford's farm in Hemet, California at least once more, in 1950, when she was already famous. She parked outside. She walked up the drive. She returned saying her father had refused to see her. She knew his name her entire life. The question was whether science could ever prove what she already believed. Ludovic Orlando was not looking for Marilyn Monroe. That fact matters enormously. Orlando, a molecular archaeologist at the Center for Anthropobiology and Genomics of Toulouse in southern France, was researching a methodological problem, specifically how much usable genetic information can be recovered from biological material that has degraded over decades. He was working on technique. He had no celebrity biography to write. When filmmaker Francois Palms approached Orlando with a preservation case strand of Monroe's hair, sourced through John Resnikoff, the president of University Archives in Connecticut, who had authenticated several Monroe samples over many years, Orlando agreed to process it as a scientific question, not a historical one. The strand used was the one Resnikoff considered most genetically valuable, collected in the hours immediately following Monroe's death, before any chemical embalming process had altered the biological material. Orlando's laboratory extracted a working genetic profile from the keratin of that single strand. The yield was 22% of Monroe's full genetic map, sufficient for a targeted comparison. This was evidence track 1. The documentary team then traced the Gifford family line forward from Charles Stanley Gifford, born in 1898 in Newport, Rhode Island, and located a single surviving granddaughter, Francine Gifford Dare, then 75 years old, running an insurance business in Norfolk, Virginia. She provided a saliva sample. Orlando processed the comparison without biographical context. He was given 2 samples and asked one question. The result was what the researchers formally designated a 3-generation genetic match. Neither team knew precisely what the other had found. Both arrived at the same answer. Before stating what the comparison confirmed, the strongest objection deserves honest presentation. 22% of a genetic profile compared against a granddaughter's sample produces a result that is compelling, but not mathematically absolute. A 3-generation link could, in theory, reflect shared ancestral population rather than direct biological connection. This is a legitimate challenge. It cannot be dismissed. The research team acknowledged it directly. Orlando's own public language was measured, strong scientific support, not a court-admissible certainty. What answered that objection was the second evidence track, entirely independent of the genetics. Birth record documentation excludes Martin Mortensen by geography alone. Census and separation records place him outside California during the period of Norma Jean's conception. Employment records at Consolidated Film Industries confirm Gifford and Gladys Baker worked in documented proximity throughout 1925. Doherty's testimony is on camera. The gold-framed photograph is a matter of record. And Francine Gifford Dare, who had known for decades that her grandfather had a famous half-daughter he refused to acknowledge, provided testimony that the family had carried this knowledge quietly for 2 generations. 2 independent tracks, one documentary, one genetic, neither built to support the other, both pointing in the same direction. This is where they meet. What the convergence cannot measure is the human weight of what it confirms. In 1962, the last year of Monroe's life, Gifford suffered a heart attack and had a nurse contact Monroe on his behalf. He wanted to speak to her before he died. She did not return the call. He recovered. He outlived her by 3 years. The silence at the center of this story was not one man's cruelty alone, though cruelty was present. It was produced by a structure, a specific, documented architecture of social and legal pressure in early 20th century California. The film industry of the 1920s operated under moral supervision that studios managed as a commercial necessity. Illegitimacy carried legal consequence for the child and professional consequence for the mother. A supervisor who acknowledged an affair with a subordinate faced reputational damage. A woman who made a paternity claim without legal standing faced dismissal and social exile. The system did not require explicit coercion to produce silence. It produced silence automatically through the ordinary operation of power. Marilyn Monroe's case is not unique in its structure. It is unique only in the prominence of the name attached to it. Genealogists working with California birth records from this era have a term for what Gladys Baker did on that birth certificate. They call it protective registration, the deliberate naming of an absent husband to shield a child from the legal category of illegitimacy. It was common. It was rational. It erased thousands of biological fathers from the record. Marilyn Monroe built herself from almost nothing, from foster homes and borrowed confidence and the kind of determination that forms in people who learn early they will not be given what they need. She made herself the most recognized face of the 20th century. She carried a gold-framed photograph of a man who told her to see his attorney. The lock of hair in Connecticut has answered the question it was asked. The other question was hers alone to ask.